I've had so much brisket over the last 5 days. You just have no idea. I think I'm going to have to chuck out some of the leftover brisket. I can't eat it. I don't think again. I don't know. Maybe it's like I got all this heartburn. Like it could be the spicy pomegranate barbecue sauce that I made.
Yeah, that sounds likely. There was just an article that meat is okay. Did you see that one?
Yeah. I always felt meat was okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Jeet.
This is Jeet.
Oh, the chickens are always good candidates at this point. You know what they do now? Did I tell you that now Sadie, our 6-year-old, is now like, she's like deathly afraid of the chickens now, and because they'll chase her and peck her. They've turned. They've had enough.
Kind of like the turkeys, who survived the helicopter drop on WKRP, where now they are advancing on the humans.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So and they go after Reagan too. They go after Reagan. So their days are numbered at this point. There's going to be some good chicken eating pretty soon.
Yeah. Just start walking around with a cleaver and they'll keep their distance.
It's like chickens are the only animal where you can have your pet and eat them too.
Remember when my daughter was like 4 and we were having, dinner, and she's like, isn't it funny that there's a food called chicken and an animal called chicken?
Yeah.
And Tamara and I were like, yeah, that's so weird. Like I don't understand.
What a coincidence.
Welcome to the Modern Digital Enterprise, formerly Device Squad, the digital transformation podcast from Anexinet, part of the Anexinet Podcast Network.
As a leading technology consultancy and reseller, Anexinet helps clients provide a complete digital experience for customers, employees, and end users. We accomplish this through our holistic approach, which encompasses all aspects of today's digital journey, end-to-end. Anexinet partners with top technology vendors like HPE to offer products and services that enhance the digital experience across customer engagement, enterprise mobility, cloud and hybrid IT, and analytics. Because great digital experiences rely on the smooth operation of all interconnected elements. From strategy through execution, we deliver custom multi-channel applications, including web, mobile, chat, and voice. With self-service apps for customer loyalty and enterprise apps that streamline internal processes, now you can reimagine legacy applications to propel your business forward. Anexinet also helps you embrace modern cloud and hybrid IT infrastructure to provide a seamless experience at every touchpoint, empowering you to recover quickly from disaster, scale to meet demand, and automate systems for perfect performance 24/7. And to maximize your competitive advantage, we ensure you always deliver the best experience possible by continuously honing your digital solutions through data-driven insights. So, how do you know if your business has what it takes to provide the complete digital experience? One that sets you apart, maintains competitive edge, and turns users into passionate fans? Simple. Just give us a call. Together, we can deepen engagement and make every digital experience remarkable. Today
we've got who's now actually my co-host at this point. I think you're a regular co-host, senior mobile strategist Glenn Gruber. You all know his voice.
Hey, Steve. And everyone out there in podcast land.
And with us today, we're happy to have Jeet Shome, who is a VP at Citizens Bank. We're going to be talking about how robotic process automation is transforming banking and making things better for Citizens Bank.
RPA is definitely an area that is pretty hot. There's a lot of interest in it. And one of the other things I do for all you guys out there in podcast land is I manage the Emerging Technology Council for Anexinet. That's something that we do with Maribel Lopez from Lopez Research. And Jeet is actually a member of the ETC. And, he and I had a chance to sit and have coffee at his office, because luckily he's only about 15 minutes away from where I live. And he's done a lot with it, but I know in talking with other members that it's something that people are looking into, but they're not quite sure what it really is, what's it really good for. And there's just some open questions. And so I think that this will be good for those ETC members as well as anyone else who listens.
Absolutely. So, G, why don't you go ahead and just tell us about your personal digital journey and how you wound up working for Citizens Bank?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. My early career, as a technology manager, way early, I guess. Those days, we were the first to develop real-time billing for mobile phone customers. And then I started my own firm, consulting for larger companies in different phases of their technology transformation. Various industries, healthcare, banking, utilities. So super exciting to get that kind of exposure. Then, I moved along obviously with the industry trends, as you can imagine, one has to, right? From CRP and ERP or mobile and so on. And now mostly with RPA and emerging low-code BPM, agile, process mining, and AI/ML. So coming to my current work, I was previously with CVS since about 2014 and was selected to lead their RPA program before I came to Citizens Bank. So living in this area in New England, I was obviously familiar with Citizens Bank and its great reputation for service, even on Sundays. Worth repeating, even on Sundays, okay, at your Stop and Shops and Dunkin' Donuts. So I also admired them for, positioning themselves as, you see in the area as preferred bank for services like student loans and high interest CDs and so on. And then I met some people who worked at Citizens Bank, and I loved the passion they had for their work and, doing the best for customers in the community. So I was really excited to join them, and I'm glad I did.
So let's start by talking about how you applied RPA, robotic process automation at CVS.
Right. So RPA, or robotic process automation, is essentially a software tool that performs repetitive tasks that a human normally does, right? And one thing I always mention here is that because of the word robot in RPA, robotic process automation, we might first tend to conjure up images of something like C3PO or the Terminator sitting at the computer and performing tasks. But that's not at all what it is, right? It's a software tool that runs just like most software somewhere in a data center, on a virtual machine, or even on a cloud platform. So that's one thing. Now, there's two types of RPA. The first one is attended RPA, right, where human interaction takes place and typical use cases are in call centers. This is where we started out with at CVS, right? Think about it. We have users, hundreds or thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of call center agents at larger companies doing lots of repetitive tasks, primarily in response to customers' phone calls. So what do they have to do? They access multiple applications to view or update data, such as, for example, a customer's address, requests for service, questions. When a customer calls, right, the user or agent typically launches multiple applications, 5 or even 10, to view the customer's data, their address, credit, balance, invoices, interaction history, accounts, etc. So now enter the attended RPA tool, which does all that in the background. You don't have to launch any of these applications, search for each customer in each of these applications, navigate to the appropriate screen in each of these applications for each customer. All that is done in the background, right? So this essentially, what it does is it reduces that average handling time of a call when they're with the customer. Another example would be, if a customer requests an update to their address or contact details, RPA allows it to do it once and then updates all the other applications in the background within that same click.
Jeet, let me ask you a couple of questions about that from the customer service rep perspective. So instead of now having to open up all 10 of those different apps, applications that you were talking about, is there now just basically like a single pane of glass kind of view to the customer and to all the information that they need instead?
Yes. So most of the RPA tools in the attended RPA space will have a dashboard where it'll pull in the information from all of these applications. It'll launch these applications in the background and pull in all this essential information in one place.
So this is kind of like, beyond maybe making those agents more productive, this has to lower the, kind of mental overhead, on
Yeah,
them as they do their job dramatically.
exactly. Because now, they don't have to figure out which application to launch, find the credentials for each of those applications, search for the customer in each of those applications. None of that, right?
So it literally creates a new UI by consolidating all
That's part
the
of it. Yes,
interface.
that's one of the first quick wins with
Wow.
the attended tool. Yeah.
In that type of environment, what kind of, improvements to productivity could one expect if they were going to try and roll out RPA, assisted RPA? Let's keep the conversation focused here, at their organization.
So typically you'll see, depending on the use case, typically you'll see between 8 and 15% savings, where the average handling time will come down, right? Depending on the type of call, the efficiency would depend on that, and how much of that can be automated and brought down, right? So that results in handling more calls during that time, or using that time to cross-sell or upsell to the customer.
When you're coming up with the proposal, to management to say,
Yeah.
hey, let's do RPA, it's kind of easier to point to, say that, 8 to 15% gain in productivity. But are you often also working with maybe people on the revenue side of things to try and model out what that potential cross-sell, upsell, bump is and make that part of the proposal? Or is that just gravy?
Absolutely. So in some of the easier use cases, you may not have to go into the software benefits in the initial phase. So the quick wins are easier to justify, right? But when you go into use cases where the efficiency is not that evident in terms of hard dollars or percentages. So for example, you could have cases that just give you higher accuracy, right? Because there's less human interaction, from fat fingering or whatever. You have higher accuracy, and because it's standard, you'll have better compliance, right? You'll have increased security, and it's a better user experience. So how do you quantify that? Those softer benefits sometimes are missed by most companies initially, right? A lot of them will go in just for the hard benefits, looking at that 18, 15, 20% or whatever. And for companies that are higher up on the maturity curve, they'll see that they may have gone in for those hard benefits, but it's the softer benefits that actually are even more. The better accuracy, better compliance, less audits, lower risk, higher security, increased sales, right? And they're users doing higher value tasks. So for example, right, one would be where, there's a case where exempt employees were working long unpaid hours because they're exempt, right? They were using those long hours, sometimes nights, to validate software deployments and being called in the middle of the night to perform some of that. Now the RPA is able to do most of that extra work, and the employees are able to work normal hours during doing more development instead of the unglamorous long off hours validation work. But this softer benefit is usually not at the forefront of why people start doing RPA. It's only realized for when they're higher up on the maturity curve.
But is that accuracy, the reduction in audit and such, is that more valuable for a bank, for someone in the pharmaceutical or healthcare sector just because of the regulation around some of that too?
Exactly. So in the healthcare sector, there's more federal requirements that have to be met, clinical trials, for example, also. So the more that those are automated, those are repetitive, unglamorous tasks, right? That frees up time, that gives back hours to the business to do the more higher value tasks.
It feels like this is a technology that's been around for a while. I mean, just at its core, like I'm thinking about Apple scripting and some of these ancient kind of technologies. So how has it evolved recently to make it, more efficient, more usable?
As you said, RPA's been around for a while. So now some of the tools, the RPA tools directly will connect with AI and ML services to, either AWS or Google Cloud or something like that. So think about it, now we can not only just automate reports, but we can do data extraction and then use AI ML services to forecast and do predictive analysis. And this is the next level of RPA, right? Where, we term it connected RPA. And here another great use case would be, leveraging the power of, OCR, for example, optical character recognition. So, let's say large companies have documents that are scanned with an OCR tool and input into RPA for processing. So we eliminate that need to manually enter data in a document for digitizing. The OCR extracts the fields from the document, for example, a credit card, a loan application, and sends those fields to the RPA tool for processing. So this, connected RPA concept is a huge multiplier, right, in this next phase.
So we talked a little bit about assisted RPA and some of the use cases that it's good for. What about kind of the back office RPA? It would seem that there's probably different use cases around that. Maybe we can just talk
Exactly.
about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the unattended RPA. So this, as the name suggests, does not require human interaction. It's the more back office use cases. So for example, where a business processes data or forms for, credit card applications or customers signing up for services or opening an account. So these type of applications can now be processed without human interaction. The unattended RPA tool, it'll read the data from a file or even an application and then access relevant data in other third-party systems, for example, for credit verification or address verification or identity verification, and then process the applications and create accounts as the case may be, right? This eliminates that need to have humans review large volumes of standard forms and then for each one, look up the data in other applications and process the applications in a repetitive fashion.
It even also seems to me, and you brought up the integration with machine learning and such. It seems to me that this can also help remove bias in approval of who gets a loan or who gets a credit card, because now it's just the computer using attributes that are applied to everyone without
more objective, yes,
yeah,
and standard, yeah.
So that seems to have some really good societal benefits as well as operational benefits.
With that respect, is there any risk of bias when you introduce?
You could have that in your training data or in your model. Bias could be introduced and sometimes is, but there are ways to mitigate that. And, that's where, we need to be more aware and make sure that those controls are there and those mitigants are there so that the bias doesn't creep in either from the data or from the model.
Sure.
But if you look at it from the end consumer point of view, the consumers get their things done a lot faster, where when, previously they'd have to wait for their application, somebody'd be processing it, there's a backlog and so on. But now this could just happen overnight or even in real time.
Yeah, it's actually, this, just relatively recently, I signed up for the, sorry, it wasn't a Citizens Bank card, but it was the Amex Delta card because we wanted to go take a trip to Paris. So we figured to try and rack up some miles really quickly. And it was definitely where I think within minutes of me filling out the online application, I got a virtual card approved. A few days later, I got the physical card, but yeah, I was kind of like off and running.
Yeah.
The speed at which approvals can happen, is dramatic, which also helps, especially if people know about it. It gets you through the completion of those forms really quickly. And then you get that moment of, perhaps unexpected joy. I mean, in a few years, everyone, I guess, will begin to expect that kind of response. But
They already
that
do.
immediate gratification. Well, okay. It was a surprise to me.
We're all pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. But those are the types of things which I think are really great and help when you think about constructing, an experience for the customer, kind of really easy onboarding. Yeah, these are some of the tools that you may not think about, but are really valuable in that overall consumer experience.
And it's competitive, right? So, like you said, if one bank does it, everybody else has to do it because then it becomes expected.
Yeah, absolutely.
The bar keeps getting raised.
So beyond like the application, type of thing, like what are some other examples that you can maybe give some of our listeners, to think about? I think the more examples that we can provide, the better that maybe they're not in finance or they're not in healthcare, and they can start to see how this could be used.
The best cases for attended, best and obvious wins are call centers. So for, companies starting out with attended, that would be, one of their easiest places to start. As far as attended, the use cases are obvious for, back office processing. There are a bunch of use cases in HR for onboarding employees.
Do companies, in your experience or what you've heard from others, start with attended first and then move to unattended? Is there any, order in terms of, the growth and maturity?
So that's a good question. It depends on the business, right? If the company has a business that has a lot of, call centers or call center agents, then attended would be the place to start. Whereas in finance or industries similar to that, there's more back office processing, right? So there, unattended would be a better place to start to get that win first.
Let's transition a little bit to talk about scale and ROI in terms of moving forward. It seems that, if you have a lot of call center agents or if you have a lot of repetitive processes, that RPA is awesome. It is an awesome tool to have in the arsenal for the company. But what is a good definition of a lot? It would seem that, I don't know. I mean, I personally don't know what these platforms cost, but I'm sure it's more than $1. And and so probably many dollars. So there has to be some sort of threshold where this starts to make sense. And maybe can you help frame that a bit?
Exactly, sure. So when you first start, you're obviously looking at ROI to justify the investment in it. And that's where you would pick the simpler test cases or the simpler use cases with higher volume. That's where it's a lot easier to justify ROI and to get started with RPA. And then once you have that experience of how it works, what needs to be done, and then you go on to look for other use cases, then to figure out hard ROI, you're going to look at, okay, these are my license costs, hardware costs, development costs, maintenance, and so on, versus these are the hours I'm saving, and this is the volume. So normally that's how you would realize the ROA or calculate it. However, as you now have, once get into this and go on to subsequent use cases, as mentioned, what we're finding and what more and more companies are doing is, from their experience, seeing the other software benefits that usually aren't in those exact, these are the hours or this is the percentage I'm saving. So for example, let's say there's a sample case in, the finance or health industry, where we're looking at just a small sample of data, just because to get to analyze that sample, it's so labor intensive, either because of volume or because of that process of the number of people and hours it takes to gather and analyze the data. A lot of companies are just using small samples, right? But if we automate it, we're now able to go from that small 2% or 3% sample to 100% sample. So our decisions now can be much better, more reliable and accurate. So, when we're looking at ROI, these softer things also then come into the consideration.
I was just listening to a webinar from 451 yesterday. About 40% of the effort of machine learning is the data preparation, and management of that. So you're saying that, there's always a lot of manipulation of that data, pulling out of systems, normalizing it, and so on. Data wrangling, I think some people call it. You're saying that RPA can actually play a meaningful role in reducing a lot of that effort, which I guess theoretically allows you to train your models faster and better and start to get more use of machine learning in the enterprise.
That's one possible application, yes.
Okay.
Because if you can set a rule to say, this is the way to extract the data and this is the way to manipulate it and load it, and for large volumes you allow RPA to do it, then that could be a good starting point for your ML to do its processing.
Wow, that's incredible. I just wanted to also introduce one other use case before we move on, which is in the monitoring of business systems, which I just read an article about. And it seems like RPA could really be used to monitor any software or to test any kind of software by using bots to simulate human interactions with the software to ensure that everything's working as it should. So Citizens Bank or CVS, did they also use RPA for those applications?
Yep. So remember the example that I mentioned where you had exempt employees doing validation tasks of software. Either you have releases of software where colleagues then need to go out and validate it every time that happens, and that could be huge, right? The testing of and validating of changes. So once that's automated, it frees up this skilled labor force to do more development work and growth work rather than this off hours type of validation work. And that's the software, which is testing software, right? So it's software testing other software and automating that software that's testing the final software. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Am I able to connect that?
And is there
it's
any
software
reason...
for software, right?
Right, sure. Get the machines to check the machines.
Exactly.
But is there any way why that can't happen just continuously? I mean, would that be overkill, or is that a common practice?
Well, the thing with RPA is that it needs to be stable and predictable. So as the underlying software or underlying configurations of the target that you're automating changes, so does the automation, right? So it comes to a point, is the underlying use case stable and predictable?
In many ways, this is still a very structured process that we're automating. And kind of like if you even doing Excel macros or just any sort of scripting, if you change the path that you're going down, or if you have a dynamic process, that this type of automation is just not going to do really well for that.
Correct. This stage, RPA is still where it needs to be predictable and stable and rules driven, right? We say if you can write the rules on a piece of paper, then it can be automated. But if it's ever changing, then it's not a good candidate.
Right. So it actually makes it, I know robotic process automation sounds a lot sexier, but it really seems that repeatable process automation is really what it's about.
Repeatable is key, yeah.
So something else I wanted to talk about, and this was based when we met for coffee. I was kind of under the assumption that yes, there's all these different RPA platforms out there, and so for a given organization, I would probably want to choose one of those platforms and then be able to do both the assisted and unassisted RPA with that one platform because it's one license that I'm getting, and I can get scale out of that, and the resources who are customizing the processes, I can scale
The
that
knowledge
group,
stays, yeah.
right? But I think from what you told me that there's actually differences in how those systems maybe came up, and that if you want to go for best in class, you may choose product A for assisted and product B for unassisted, which seems unfortunate, but maybe you could elaborate.
Right. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is even if a tool offers both assisted and unassisted, the license costs are separate. So they'll have a model for assisted and a separate model for unassisted.
One hand in your left pocket, one hand in your right pocket.
Exactly, right. And they offer it that way probably because the industry starts with one and they don't want to pay for the whole package. And then when they go to the other one, they'll pay for that separately. And also, the architecture is different, the hardware is different,
How so?
configuration is different.
How so? Because I'm trying to understand like what really makes it, and for the listeners to understand, what really makes it different. Because if I still have a repeatable process that I'm going to invoke, whether manually or triggered by some inbound event, why would those be architected differently necessarily?
So let's say in the case of attended automation, right, the one we talked about with the call centers, in that case for attended automation, you'll have the software actually sitting on each user's machine. Okay, it'll have a footprint and install on each person's machine that's using it, right? Each of the agents. And then that'll obviously talk to a central server in our data center. However, in the case of unattended, right, there's no footprint on a user's machine. There's nothing, right? It's completely independent and it's only in the data center on the VM. So that fundamental difference of triggering it separates the two architectures, right?
And the setup of the customizable interface.
Right. The development environments are also separate. It may have a similar look and feel, but the configuration is separate for an attended part of the automation and the unattended part.
So for those whose appetite you have now whet for trying to do RPA, which ones do you think are maybe better suited for attended versus unattended if someone was trying to maybe help create a bit of a short list?
Right. So the biggest players in this area for attended automation are UiPath and Automation Anywhere. And for unattended, Blue Prism is a leader, along with the other two that I just mentioned, right? The tool selection would depend on a few things, right? Because each tool, as we said, have their strengths. So it would depend on where the majority of your use cases are. That would be the first thing. The second would be, what kind of integrations are needed and offered, and what is the underlying technology that's being automated. Those would go into, looking at each tool based on what the majority of your use cases are. And obviously, you'd look at the obvious things like enterprise-grade security, scalability, ease of configuration, and things like that. But most of these three tools have all of that at that level. There are other players that could be looked at, but these are the leaders.
I just want to ask about one other use case. I'm just wondering if RPA itself can be used as a security tool to help either identify or ward off, potential attackers.
I'm trying to answer this cautiously. And I'll mention what, we have as public information is, we have used it to improve security. Actually, it's public information. We even received a award for this, and you'll find this on the internet, where we use bots for identity governance. So automating that just increases the security level of the company, right, and makes that faster as well.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking that bots could be used to simulate attackers, and then, but in a safe manner, and then identify holes that way. Or
That's a good point. I haven't come across any use cases like that, and that may be because of the variation of attacks that could take place. But yeah, I haven't had any so far use cases so far in that area.
Couple of things I wanted to ask about. So, you've implemented RPA at CVS and Citizens. Do you end up going with the same platform provider with both?
At CVS, they actually had a number of different platforms just because of the size of the company and the variety of use cases in the different divisions. They used a number of tools. There wasn't just one tool.
So then maybe from like a tips or takeaways for someone thinking about RPA at their company, maybe, if you could kind of break that down into just general best practices, but also with the platforms that you chose, were there any things that were either surprises, good or bad, that you kind of stumbled across or through during the implementation, like after the sales guys left?
Yeah. What I would say as far as tips or takeaways is it's important to start with simple, quick win use cases. It is tempting to take, a painful or complex process and use RPA to solve it or gain that efficiency. But it's a better strategy to use a simple case to gain that experience and learn, and at the same time have that quick win and success. Starting small will, it allows us to build that road for more complex and bigger cases. This way, the application owners, business users, they become conversant with the concept of how bots access and automate processes. It's part of the learning and embracing process in the digital transformation. And then the more complex cases get done, smoothly on budget and on schedule. So, if there's one thing, I'd say that's the key.
But if you start small, like I'm just trying to think of what I've seen with every other major software platform buy over the course of time. Yes, you may want to start small and build your experience, but when you're trying to sell the idea through to management to get the funding, to get the platform in place, do you have to still sell the bigger vision, or is the way that some of these platforms run their licensing in such a way that you could sort of buy what you need, not just on a user perspective, but maybe
they're all on buy what you need. So usually the attended license are per user and the unattended ones are per bot, so you can scale up as you go along.
Okay.
The key in the beginning is to get something that's simple enough but high volume. So that simplicity gives you that easier learning curve, and the volume will give you that return.
Gotcha.
we can start to wrap up. We just look to the future for a second. What does RPA not offer that you'd like to see? Alternately, what do you think is next for RPA? Where do you think it's going? How do you think it could be improved further?
A couple of things, right? On the business or corporate end, it needs to be seen as, and the companies that are higher in the maturity curve get this, is that it's a part of the digital transformation toolkit. And to be aware of the softer benefits that we spoke about. So that's one part of it. And to avoid the temptation of just thinking of it as, saved labor, right? Or headcount saving. That's one part of it. On the technical side of it, I think more connectivity to an ecosystem of products, like we mentioned, to your OCR or AI ML products on the cloud, that just multiplies the power of it. So I think that's where, the growth in RPA is going to be, and, we'll see more benefits out of that. And obviously, as more and more companies do it, the usual skill level and maturity level and familiarization, momentum will just grow.
How steep is the initial learning curve and the training curve for the basics of compiling this interactive interface?
They're usually all .NET and C# based, but it does require you to have familiarity, and the more the better, in configuring the product, in learning how to program it to automate. So that is definitely something that needs to be learned. And all the the big players offer their own training and certifications and so on, which is, I'll admit, quite robust with all these three big players. But that's an essential part of it, right? Getting the skill level. And the best course, as always, is to have a core team of internal employees start that training early on, so that when you have the vendors or consulting partners doing it, your core team is involved. That way, their skill level grows with the implementations at the company. And that way the internal FTEs have that knowledge and can control the decisions made with the product, what use cases come in and so on. That's still a challenge, but as companies begin their journey, that gets smoothed out with that knowledge.
Do you have any technology or business predictions?
I'll predict that robots will not make humans obsolete. We will coexist in a beneficial manner like we always have. And maybe also to address concerns of folks who have some negative views of automations. I always say ATMs did not make tellers obsolete. There are in fact more and higher paid tellers today than ever before. VCRs and streaming movies didn't make movie theaters obsolete, right? Movie halls are more profitable than ever before. So to them I'll say we'll be fine, and we'll progress as we always have.
That's good. That's a very optimistic outlook for this podcast. That's great. Is there anything that we didn't address that you'd like to just discuss before we wrap up?
Probably want to say there are some things that may not be a good fit for RPA, and those need to be called out as well, to temper the hype, and not fall for that also. There are limitations, like we talked about, if the underlying applications or processes are unstable or continuously changing. There's some technologies that are more challenging to automate, if they're running under Citrix, or we've all seen the CAPTCHAs, right? Those are specifically designed to prevent bot activity, right? So things like that. A lot of websites and even vendors are becoming aware that their sites are being accessed by bots, which is something that humans did before, but now they're being done overnight by bots. So some of the vendors and websites will put in clauses in their contracts to say that bot activity is allowed, or is allowed up to a certain volume, or it's not allowed at all. That legal part in this industry is also forming, right? And that sometimes needs to be clarified and called out when the bots are doing that.
I'm a little confused. So you're saying that these are just new rules that will need to be established?
Exactly. So let's say I'm processing an application, and I have to verify the customer with a third-party credit scoring company, right? But now we're having a bot do that. So the third-party credit company may not be aware of that, and may want to say that, no, we only want humans to access it. We don't want a bot to access our database.
Oh, I see. That's very interesting. So they would just need to be aware if those restrictions are in place, first of all.
Exactly. And, the main concern is obviously for the vendors or websites is someone crawling our site, hitting it with bots, and we're going to get a denial of service error, right? Or it could be that are they extracting information from our site and selling it somewhere else? So they need to protect themselves from that sort of bot activity and allow the legal bot activity. But all that, is still forming, in the contracts with vendors, on the websites, and so on.
That's a great point.
So one last thing before we wrap, or maybe just one other question now, where we're talking about like what's a good fit or maybe what's a bad fit. We at Anexinet, we definitely have a process, whether it be for a mobile application or features within a mobile application or desktop application, where we try and prioritize which applications, which features we pull forward first. Sort of massaging the backlog. And you've talked about starting with the simple. So we have a process where we try and canvas the organization for all the ideas, and then we score along different attributes as to how valuable is this to the business, how ready are we or established are the processes that underlie the feature concept, which seems very similar to, do we have a stable process? And I would imagine volume might be another criteria. How did you guys manage that? Was that something, did you have a core team look at that, or did you talk with different members of the organization across citizens to try and identify and prioritize, where do we start?
Right. So usually you'll have a list of, a backlog or a pipeline, like what you have. And then you'll go over each one and prioritize based on, what's the value of it and what's the win, right? Steve, Glenn, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jeet. Hey, Glenn, thanks for joining, and thanks for getting Jeet on the podcast. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, it's something that we are going to try and do is to bring more members from the ETC onto the podcast and kind of share their experiences.
Yeah, and it's nice to hear somebody with an optimistic take on robotic automation. We always go the robot overlords always winds up somehow.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see who's right.
Yeah. I'm a little concerned about, how far does it go with having the machines check the machines? And then we need machines to check the machines that are checking the machines.
Yeah.
And then who can we trust? Nobody.
R2D2. That's a good thing.
That's true. C3PO may be a little neurotic.
Yeah.
But
he is the Zachary Smith of robots. I want nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
Another deep cut reference. For those of you old enough to get that one.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Modern Digital Enterprise, formerly Device Squad, the digital transformation podcast from Anexinet. Take care. See you next time.